I was 14 when my mother died, and it shattered my world. My father had already moved on long before she passed away, and within months of her death, he was engaged to Beth. Beth was a force of nature, controlling, relentless, and obsessed with ensuring that her son, Josh, was the center of attention. My father never grieved my mother, at least not in a way that I could see. He was too busy setting up his new life with Beth. As for me, I had no choice but to move in with them. I was the unplanned addition, an unwanted guest in their perfect little family. Beth made sure I knew my place from the beginning, her rules, her way. I wasn't just mourning my mom, I was losing everything I had ever known. For years, I kept my head down, waiting for the day I could escape. When I got into college, I chose a university in-state to save money, which meant I had to stay under my father's roof for a little longer. At first, it seemed manageable. I paid rent, kept to myself, and avoided unnecessary confrontations. But then I met Laura. Laura was everything I needed. She was warm, kind, and saw through the walls I had built around myself. We fell fast and hard, and for once, I thought I had something that was mine, something Beth couldn't control. But Josh had other ideas. He became obsessed with her. At first, I thought it was just a harmless crush, something that would pass, but it didn't. He lingered, watched her too closely, inserted himself into our conversations. I tried to be patient. I warned him privately to back off, but it only made things worse. He spiraled, his grades dropped, and he became fixated on Laura in a way that was unsettling. One evening, my father sat me down. He wasn't alone. Beth was there too, standing behind him like a puppeteer pulling the strings. "Liam, we need to talk," he started, his voice hesitant. I leaned back in my chair. "About what?" Beth wasted no time. "Josh is struggling, and we think it's best if you end things with Laura." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You can't be serious," I said, laughing bitterly. "Liam," my father continued, "this isn't about taking sides. It's about family. Josh is obsessed with my girlfriend," I interrupted. "And you think the solution is for me to break up with her? Are you out of your mind?" Beth's expression remained calm, calculating. "Do you really think a girl is more important than your own brother's well-being?" I stood up. "Let me make something clear. I am not breaking up with Laura because your son can't handle rejection." Beth's smile faltered. "You're being selfish." I shook my head, scoffing. "No, I'm done being controlled." And that was it. I packed my things, changed my phone number, and walked away from my father, Beth, and Josh. I thought that was the end of it. But 12 years later, Josh showed up at my doorstep. He looked nothing like the entitled stepbrother I once knew. He was worn down, exhausted, as if life had drained the fight out of him. "Hey man," he said, giving me a hesitant smile. I didn't move. "What do you want?" He glanced around, taking in the house, the life I had built. "I need help." I crossed my arms. "Not my problem." He flinched but pushed forward. "I left home. Beth, she didn't care once you were gone. Everything fell apart. I dropped out, got into some bad situations, and now I don't even have a place to stay." I studied him, searching for some sign that he was still the same Josh. But all I saw was a man who had lost everything. "So," I said, "what does that have to do with me?" His jaw tightened. "You were supposed to be my brother." I laughed. "Oh, now we're brothers." He looked down, his voice quieter. "I'm sorry, Liam, for everything." For the first time in years, I saw sincerity in his eyes. But was it enough? I glanced back at Laura, who was watching from the hallway. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "You always said you wanted to be better than your father," she murmured. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Fine. One condition, get your act together." Josh nodded eagerly, barely believing his luck. I stepped aside, letting him in. As the door closed behind him, I knew that the past wasn't done with me yet. Josh settled into the guest room. Though it was clear he wasn't used to stability, his clothes were worn, his movements hesitant, as if he was waiting for me to kick him out at any moment. I kept my distance, unsure if I was making a mistake by letting him in. Laura wasn't thrilled about it either. but she trusted me to handle it. The first few days were tense. Josh barely spoke, keeping to himself most of the time. When we did talk, it was mostly about logistics, finding him a job, making sure he didn't end up back on the streets. I set boundaries early. No drinking, no bringing strangers over, and he had to actively search for work if he wanted to stay. To my surprise, he agreed without argument. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, he finally opened up. "I never wanted you to leave," he admitted, pushing his food around his plate. "Beth made it impossible for us to be close. She twisted everything, made me think you were the problem." I let out a humorless chuckle. "Took you long enough to figure that out?" He nodded, his expression serious. "I was a stupid kid. I let her control me. When you left, I thought you abandoned me. But now, I get it." I studied him, trying to gauge whether he was being genuine or just looking for sympathy. But his eyes were clear, filled with something I hadn't seen in him before. Regret. "So, what happened after I left?" I asked. He sighed. Beth was, relieved. She acted like losing you was some kind of victory, but the house felt different, empty. Dad barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was just to tell me to get my act together. Beth started pushing me harder, forcing me to be the perfect son since you weren't there to take the blame anymore. I leaned back in my chair. "Let me guess, you cracked under the pressure?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, my grades tanked. I started hanging out with the wrong people. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I dropped out, lost touch with everyone, and just drifted." I shook my head. "You had a choice, Josh. We all did." He looked at me then, eyes full of something close to desperation. "I know. That's why I'm here. I want to do better. I just don't know how." His words hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give him a real shot. But another part, one that remembered every manipulative thing Beth had done, wondered if this was just another trick. Laura placed a hand on my arm, grounding me. "We can't change the past," she said softly, "but maybe he can change his future." I exhaled slowly. "Fine. You stay here, you get a job, and you prove that you mean what you say. No excuses." Josh nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "I will, I swear." Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started to see real change. He landed a job at a local Walmart, working his way up from stocking shelves to a junior manager position. He enrolled in night classes, trying to make up for lost time. For the first time in his life, he seemed to be standing on his own 2 feet. But then, one night, everything fell apart. I came home late from work to find Laura pacing in the living room, her face tense. "Beth called him," she said before I could even ask. My stomach dropped. "What? He didn't tell you, did he?" She crossed her arms. "She found out where he was and has been calling nonstop. She wants him to come back." Anger bubbled in my chest. After all these years, Beth was still trying to sink her claws into us. I stormed upstairs, knocking on Josh's door before pushing it open. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone in his hands, looking guilty. "Tell me you're not actually considering this," I said. He looked up, his expression torn. "Liam, she says Dad is sick, that he needs me," I scoffed. "And you believe her, after everything she's done?" He hesitated, gripping the phone tighter. "He's still my dad." I shook my head. "No, Josh. He stopped being a father the day he let Beth control everything." His jaw tightened. "Maybe he regrets it. Maybe he doesn't." I stepped closer. "Look, I get it. You want closure, but going back won't give you that. It'll just drag you back into their mess." He looked down at his phone, thumb hovering over the call button. "I don't know what to do." I clenched my fists. "Then make a choice. Either you move forward or you go back to the people who ruined you." He stayed silent for a long time. Then finally he set the phone down. "I want to move forward." Relief flooded through me, but I knew this wasn't over. Beth wouldn't give up that easily, and I was right. A few days later, she showed up at my house. Laura answered the door, her face hardening the moment she saw who it was. "You've got some nerve." Beth smiled, the same fake saccharine smile she had always used. "I just want to talk to Josh." I stepped up beside Laura, crossing my arms. He doesn't want to see you. Her expression didn't falter. He's my son. No, I said coldly. He was just another pawn in your game. She sighed dramatically. Liam, I know you have your issues with me, but his father is sick. Doesn't he deserve to know? I stared at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. But this was Beth. There was always an angle. Funny how you only care now, I said. Where was this concern when you were ruining our lives? Her smile faded, and for a split second, I saw something real in her eyes. Fear. Desperation. He'll regret it if he doesn't say goodbye, she whispered. I wanted to tell her to leave, to never come back. But then I saw Josh standing behind us, his face pale. Is it true? He asked quietly. Beth turned to him, her expression softening. Yes, sweetheart. Your father doesn't have much time left. Josh swallowed hard, glancing at me. He was looking for guidance, for an answer I couldn't give him. Finally, I sighed. Do what you need to do. He nodded, grabbing his coat. As he walked past me, he hesitated. Thanks for everything. I watched as he got into Beth's car, a sinking feeling settling in my gut. Laura touched my arm. You think he'll come back? I exhaled slowly. I don't know. The days stretched on, and then weeks. Josh sent a few texts at first, brief updates about our father's condition, then silence. One evening, as Laura and I sat on the couch, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Josh. You were right. I should have never come back. I messed up. I don't know how to fix it. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy. Laura leaned over. What are you going to do? I didn't answer right away. Finally, I typed back, come home. There was no response. Just 3 little dots blinking on the screen. Waiting. Josh didn't come back right away. Days passed without another message. I told myself I had done what I could, that he had to make his own decisions now. But every night I checked my phone, waiting for those dots to reappear. One evening, just as I was about to turn in, the doorbell rang. Laura and I exchanged a glance before I went to answer it. When I opened the door, Josh stood there, looking like he had been through hell. His clothes were wrinkled, his face hollow with exhaustion, but there was something else, something different. I left, he said quietly. I told Beth I wasn't coming back. I studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. He hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if afraid I'd changed my mind. Laura greeted him with a nod, and for the first time, he didn't look uncomfortable around her. He sat on the couch, rubbing his hands together. Dad's gone, he said after a moment. Beth told me she'd been exaggerating how sick he was. She just wanted me back under her control. Rage flickered in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. And you believed her? He nodded. For a while, yeah. But then I saw it, the way she twisted things, the way she made me feel like I owed her something just for existing. It was like waking up. I leaned back, exhaling. So what now? His hands curled into fists. I don't know, but I want to start over. Starting over wasn't easy. There were still trust issues, still wounds that hadn't fully healed. But he didn't run away this time. He stayed, rebuilt his life brick by brick. He kept his job, finished school, even started seeing a therapist. He didn't try to make excuses for the past, and maybe that was enough. As for Beth, she didn't take losing her last pawn lightly. She called, sent messages, tried every manipulative trick in the book. But Josh never answered. Eventually, the call stopped. She was alone now, with nothing but the wreckage of the family she had torn apart. I never saw my father again. Maybe he regretted it all in the end, or maybe he died believing I had been the one who betrayed him. I'll never know, and I've learned to be okay with that. Laura and I moved forward. We built a life free of the ghosts that had once haunted us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. This whole thing taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to stand beside you, even when things get messy. And sometimes walking away isn't just the best choice, it's the only choice. So what would you have done? Do you think Josh deserved a second chance? Or should I have left him to deal with the consequences of his choices? Let me know in the comments.